Okay, we're on. All right, so welcome to TG2Chat Live, the video live stream of Teachers Going Gradeless. In today's episode, we have the privilege to learn from Rick Wormley. Rick is an experienced classroom and building educator with 41 years of teaching math, science, English, physical education, health, and history. He now writes professional articles and education books while training teachers, principals, superintendents, business organizations, school boards, and parents in North America and around the world. Rick has achieved many honors in his career, including being in the first group of nationally board certified teachers of the United States, winning the Outstanding English Teacher of the Nation from Disney American Teacher Awards, and being granted the James P. Garvin Award for Teaching Excellence, Service, and Leadership. I'm honored to have him here today with me as a guest. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Spaces. Spaces is an easy-to-use digital portfolio tool to document students' growth in and out of the classroom. So be sure to check them out, as it's a great way to facilitate gradeless learning. I also want to let you know that we are, let me get this up. Where is it? There it is. Okay. That we are having a giveaway. We're doing a drawing for TG2 merchandise. So if you're watching this live, we want to show our appreciation. Just follow the URL below and enter to win. Anyways, Rick, welcome. I'm really excited to have you with me today.
Oh, it's an honor to be here. I really respect what you guys have done with Teachers Going Gradeless and the blogs and the guest blogs. It's a go-to place for me to get inspiration and ideas. So thank you for all your effort.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so let's get started here. So your book, Fair Isn't Always Equal, is popular among the grading reform community because of its emphasis on equity and learning. What led you to the conclusion that traditional grading practices were flawed, lacked equity, and ultimately led you to write the book?
Well, there are intersecting reasons there. Sorry, it'll be longer than a one-sentence soundbite. One, I was very frustrated at Virginia Tech, where I graduated as an undergraduate, because we never got any classes on grading. We got how do you do stay nines and statistics and ed measurements, but not how to set up grade books and do tests and quizzes. And I knew that was going to be a concern, because parents would be all over that and students would be all over that. Whole futures were at stake. And at the exit interview, I actually scolded Virginia Tech, saying that was not a part of the program and it should have been. So I started gathering stuff my very first year of teaching, research, trying to get into it. I ran into Tom Guskey and Benjamin Bloom, Mastering Learning, and I really started putting a lot of things together and volunteered to be on the grading and assessment reform committee for my school district. But at the same time, we send things home in 17 different languages. We have about 149 different nations represented in my school district. We have a high transiency rate. It's about 57% or higher. And I was struggling with kids who are coming in or leaving during the middle of the year, yet we were trying to hold them accountable for all this learning. And it just seemed preposterous that some of the grades were so fudged and so distorted. You gave that a C, but I gave the same thing a B or an A. And yet we had the nerve to tell moms and dads, yeah, you could trust the grades. They're accurate. You can make high stakes decisions that totally build or destroy children's futures. And at the same time, I was really exploring teacher ethics and leadership ethics. And all three of those things coalesced together to saying, oh my gosh, we really need to have something coherent, and it has to be principled. What I find and I found in the 80s and 90s too, but even today as well, a lot of teachers are scared. They run from an anxious or an uninformed position. And what they're looking for is a lot of techniques without having the principles behind them. And if you don't have the principles behind something, you don't have the stamina to see it through logistics that might elude you, or to have the courage of conviction to see it through. So right now I might say, oh, that's really important to do. It makes a grade more accurate, or the student learn better that way. But, I can't do that. My hands are tied. And so a childish part of me decided it was time to be gently insubordinate and start questioning the status quo and not accepting complacency. And every single year, actively unlearning things that I had never put under scrutiny before. And when I did, found to be lacking. So those things came together and decided to start writing articles. The articles became critical mass to actually write the book. And then since then, as I coach people, I keep gathering that. And the more I do it and the more research comes out, the more veracity there is and the more gravitas there is in this whole endeavor that, wow, we kind of tell the public we teach this stuff to mastery, but really we make a lot of compromises, and we should come clean on what we can and can't do with the current K-12 system. And so the limiting elements of grading and the bias in grading really got under my skin, and I decided we can do right by our current generations and all the subsequent ones to come. And that was kind of the genesis of that.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same thing when I first started questioning grading. Was, how is this equitable? How is this how am I reporting what kids are learning in my class, and how is it equal to something that's happening to a different class?
Well, and then you've got the problem of some, because of one really ridiculous percentage point, get to go on and have dreams fulfilled. And some are denied that.
Right.
Because we thought we could perceive a difference when really you can't perceive a difference. It was just a way to sort children, as Tom Gusky would say. And it should be about, hey, let's cultivate students in their talents and let's not get caught up in the statistical margin of error. I mean, it was so ridiculous. I've seen valedictorian determined by 1/10,000th of a decimal point, and grades are such fragile premises on which to base so much function and dysfunction.
Yeah. And we've done like the top 5%. And I've seen kids get angry because they took all the honors and AP classes and this kid didn't. And this person beat the other kid out, and they're angry. They're angry because they can't put that on their resume that they are top 5%.
And another weird thing, sort of tangentially connected to that, I've run into so many parents and some students whose kids get 4.0s in AP courses or advanced classes at middle school or elementary, whatever it is. And they've said, I don't want you to spend so much energy and these policies helping the other kids, like relearning, reassessing, redos, retakes, or separating work habits out and not letting them, distort the truth of an accurate report of proficiency, or providing all this feedback, and the students can grow and actually achieve better as a result of that feedback. Because if all the other children are successful, how can my daughter or my son compete?
Right.
And I've had to say, do you hear yourself talk? Because the only way your child can shine is the diminishing of others. Is that really what we're about as schools? Because our mission statements don't say that ever. It's about every child learning the stuff, and that we need to have multiple pathways to get there.
Right.
And so it's the antithesis of what you really want in a strong democracy. And I think people can be superficial sometimes, and it's just an initial thing when you're trying to survive the day. So I don't want to be too judgmental, but I think a big part of this is, can I just help you see the bigger picture rather than that narrow view? And then you pull that camera lens back and you go, oh, of course, this is just decent humanity.
Right.
You'd be right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And anytime we make a change, the question is, how is this going to impact my kid?
Yeah.
And how's that going to hurt? So, yeah. So let's move on. The second edition, which I'm a fan of your second edition, I think you made some great additions to Ferris and All Is Equal. You dedicate a chapter to descriptive feedback, which I'm a big fan of, and student self-assessment. So why is it important for students to be involved in assessment itself? And what are some steps teachers can take to engage students in this process?
So many teachers are so interested in students developing self-efficacy, but that means they have to do the majority of the heavy lifting, analyzing their own work against evaluative criteria, helping to inform next steps in instructional design. And what happens when they do that, they get more invested. They don't make excuses about lack of performance. They shed this learned helplessness, and they shed, or at least they move away from the overdependence on the need for external validation. I am so much more than my grade, and I am empowered. I have the skill sets to actually add to this and control it. So much about school is about control, when it really should be about learning and progress and potential, all of that. And that doesn't happen when it's a didactic top down. I have now documented all your wrongness, and now I am declaring what you need to do to fix your wrongness. And that is going to make them passive. It's going to make them really sabotage, undermine any critique you might send to them. They're not going to own that. And, so many people, including Tom Guskey, but many, many others, have talked about students can learn without grades, but they cannot learn without that descriptive feedback, back and forth dynamic, that process. And so many times I look at teachers' lesson plans and I do not see where there is descriptive feedback going to students and the students are able to act upon that feedback. It is so frustration, a waste of everybody's time for us to give feedback and then say, oh, by the way, you can't use it. No, in the same planning breath as you design the feedback or help them, you facilitate the feedback and they own that, then you have to think about how they're going to use it, make it actionable. I've read in 2 different research books, one by John Hattie, the other one I forgot who wrote it, but 2 different books where they said that descriptive feedback, the kind that's most effective is that which is sought. So instead of the teachers always giving feedback, I have to overtly teach the descriptive feedback techniques to students so they can self-monitor. And as we know from meta-analyses from so many different people, that's in the top 1, 2, or 3 most effective things you can ever do, where a student can say, when it comes to this goal, I'm here. And here's how I know that I'm here. And here's what I need to do to kind of close that gap. And I will own that. That's the stuff that leads to what? Self-discipline, respect for deadlines, a heck of a lot of building of executive function, and the very things we all keep citing as leading to success post-high school, whatever direction that might take. So I think descriptive feedback is investing and creates a passion for what you do if you're the student, but it also builds the maturation. And other teachers do this. They do extrinsic rewards, consequences, carrot and stick stuff, and then they have the nerve to blame the students when they don't shape up. And I'm saying, let's take a look at how we build those maturation skills in students. None of it is through grades, but a heck of a lot of it is self-monitoring and owning your learning and whatever skills we can do. And that also creates this, I'm in charge of my trajectory, so I have agency. And a whole lot of the ills we associate with what's going on in schools today could come down to students not feeling like they have a voice and choice and agency in what they do. So I think for a lot of reasons, descriptive feedback techniques and principles are key to that transformation and owning it all.
Yeah. And a lot of what we do in education is always top down. I mean, yeah, we try to get teachers involved in some of the process, but how many times are we asking students to sit in some of our communities where we are making decisions that are going to impact them the most? How often are we sitting down and saying, we got these policies that we're going to impose upon you? How often are we asking students to be a part of that process too?
That's just like Dan Pink's drive. What are those 3 things that really do it? And a sense of mastery, a sense of purpose and connection. I'm part of something larger than myself, but I perceive that I have the skill set to pull this off. And I really understand what's going on. Those things are so motivating for adults, but also for students. And then it helps the teacher actually become more ethical with their grading, because now any report of student learning is a report of the learning and the evidence, not the vehicle used to deliver that evidence. We get so caught up in compliance, and you can't conflate compliance, of course, with learning. And so if I'm not so worried about, let me put it another way, if I stop using grades and points and percentages and emphasizing that, and I speak in terms of proficiency scales and evidence. So we say things like, in order to achieve basic or proficient or exemplary, or in order to demonstrate an intellectual agility or skillful versatility with this, what are some look-fors? What would we do? And then the students get a choice of, well, how would I express that? If this is what you want me to achieve, I get it. That's fine. Sorry, the camera's going in and out. I'll try to get it back focused. I just say that his comments were very blurry and hard to perceive. But anyway, it really moves them away, and we're chasing the evidence, not that I did things. And students begin to see, oh, my teacher's an advocate, not an adversary, just trying to document where I fall short, which is a lovely turn. And it's a great corner to turn.
And so we're talking about giving this descriptive feedback to kids and making them part of the process. So what are some steps that teachers can take to start bringing students into that process, getting them to ask about those gaps in their learning that they need to develop?
Well, one of my favorite ones is literally having students analyze other samples. So pretend other classmates, current classmates, former students, whatever, of different proficiency levels. And they're analyzing, they're critiquing that work in light of the same evaluative criteria that will be applied to them. They will totally move the idea of evidence into their internal editor, and they'll reference it real time while they're working on their own material. And then that we stop any kind of bargaining. Grading and really reporting student learning should never be transactional. If you give me this, I'll give you that. It's not a bartering system. It's about communication and giving you such communication that you would know what to do next. There's this Goldilocks principle in assessment and feedback. It's basically this: you have to give just enough information or facilitate the student coming to that information, just enough that they know where to go next, but not so much you do the whole thing for them already, which makes it very passive, and it's very easy to diminish or sabotage or give up or create an irrational rationalization. School is stupid. My teacher hates me. In other words, I don't have any control here, any autonomy or agency here, and we don't want to do that. So the idea that you're analyzing other things and that you get very good at giving feedback. And one of my favorite ways to do that is to begin to see yourself as a coach. And, instructional coaching with Jim Knight, Elena Aguilar, Kathy Toll, so many others, great people whose books you should all read. There's so many ideas that we can use teacher to teacher, but now we can use teacher to student. So I can sit there with the student and say, tell me more about that. How does your effort here match the standard? What would you like to do next? What would you do differently next time you had to do it over? What would you be thinking when you come to that point? When we go through learning, we stop and get metacognitive. What decisions did you make that allowed you to get to this level of success? What did you learn about yourself as a student? The idea that I put so much of that in their plate, but then I model that, and I have classmates come up and model and self-talk through that, huge. Really doing it. So the idea, we give them the tools, but then we show them over and over again the advantages that come when you give feedback. And feedback is not something threatening or something to endure. I got to put up with it. I'm a perfectionist. They're going to tell me how I'm wrong, but something that you actually seek out is the only way you can get to success. One of my favorite videos for that, in case anybody has not watched it yet, is the story of Austin's Butterfly with Ron Berger. Very popular YouTube video, and I highly recommend it. It's only about 6 or 7 minutes long, and it involves kindergarten, second grade, and fourth grade students talking about a first grader in Idaho. However, I show it to athletic directors, college professors, computer coding professors, everybody in high school, middle school. It applies, and it really reminds me that one of the roots of education is educere, which means to lead out or to draw out, depending on different interpretations. And I just think that's such a remarkable lens through which to see our enterprise. How do we draw out the potential, the learning, the love of life and subject for students, and what role does feedback play in that? Those are initial ideas. We could go on more, but I'll stop there.
Well, I actually love Austin's Butterfly, and I was introduced to that to many years ago, and I show it to my freshmen and my seniors when they're getting ready to engage in those conversations about student work. So it is an amazing video. If you haven't seen it, YouTube Austin's Butterfly. Ron Berger. So in both your books, Fair Isn't Always Equal and Differentiation, which I love that too, you emphasize the importance of differentiated instruction. So first of all, before we get into any further, how do you define differentiated instruction? Because I actually got into a conversation with somebody recently about what is and what isn't differentiation, and it was a really engaging conversation. What is differentiated instruction, and why should teachers differentiate their instruction?
Well, it's interesting. Back in like 2010, Mike Schmoker, who did Focus and Results Now, did in all his books, he was really disparaging of differentiated instruction. And I wrote a whole article called Setting the Pedagogy Straight, a response to Mike Schmoker. And I would be glad to send that to anybody who's interested, but you can just type in Setting the Pedagogy Straight, a response to Mike Schmoker, and then Rick Wormley, and that will be fine. But it's the root of differentiation is responsive teaching. So what do I know about students, and how does that inform instructional design? And instruction includes assessment and feedback. That's under the umbrella of instructional design. You can't have good assessment that does not instruct and good instruction that does not assess. They're interchangeable, inseparable as you do that. So I'm going to recommend that we begin to see ourselves as, what do I know about my students, and how does that inform what I do? And I don't have to change everything. It's not an IEP every single day. Quite often it's in flexible grouping, but it can be very individualized as well. It's whatever we do to maximize the learning over that which otherwise could have been achieved with a one size fits all. So when we do like a lesson plan in a differentiated class, we do one lesson plan, but we augment the different segments, because a lot of kids can do a lot of the parts, but we just augment the sections where, hey, that wouldn't be as successful as this other thing. But we also maintain a teacher professionalism and autonomy. It is an insult, a slap in a teacher's face, when a school district gets a bunch of teachers together over the summer for a couple of weeks in the cafeteria, library, multi-purpose lobbyum, whatever room that is in the building, and they design a pacing guide that would reflect the realities of every single classroom teacher and every single day of the school year. This is reckless and it is arrogant. So I write pacing guides. I think they're usually good. There's some wisdom there, but there should always be a mechanism where we can deviate if we find a better way to improve the learning. So another example would be, if we all going to agree that we're going to read this one novel, and that's great. I agree. This grade level, this subject, we'll read that novel. But during the year, I have a subgroup of students or one student where another novel on which I can hook the same learning would be more resonant, more meaningful. I should be allowed to change that novel without suffering from the stare of death from the department chair or the grade level team captain. But I need to have a pedagogical and instructional rationale about why I would do that. So this idea of fair isn't always equal. And so many teachers in assessment and grading, let alone instructional design, say things like this: well, that wouldn't be fair. So I can't do that with that one student. No, it would be very fair. It wouldn't be same. It wouldn't be equal. So fair, kind of the fundamental of differentiated instruction, is doing what developmentally they need right here, right now, which means I extend the timeline or I shorten it. I give them a different route, different levels of support until they can fly solo. And I begin to see the grade book is cumulative for the whole year, not just the one quarter. It goes against everything we know in human psychology to say you have to stuff all this stuff into the kid's head and he totally has to master it within that 9 weeks or that 12 weeks or whatever the number of weeks it is. It goes against everything we know. So I was hired to teach so they learn, not the way I best learn, which I am guilty of doing that earlier in my career, but the way the student learns, not the way their classmate learns. And I don't have any moral authority to say, you didn't learn the same way or in the same manner as everyone else, so I'm going to make you suffer for it because I'm preparing you for the larger world. No, the best preparation for the larger world is to really learn the stuff. Competence. Incompetence is never preparatory or maturing. So I think that differentiation, you see yourself as an advocate, and it's not a bunch of recipes. It's a bunch of principled responses and a huge repertoire. So you can be diverse. Instead of all I have is a hammer, every kid's head looks like a nail. I have to have a large skill set. So if somebody presents a challenge, I have the intellectual wherewithal and the toolkit to be able to respond to that and actually create a growth path for you and not be beholden to a uniform timeline or a uniform way of learning across the board, which I know humans like a schematic. We like an orderly sequence, but learning is messy and humans are very, very different. And we were hired to teach so they learn, not simply to say gotcha as a one arbitrary calendar date. That makes sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just had a student who was struggling with a project that we did earlier in the semester.
Yeah.
They were to create a Powtoon explaining what is myth and take a myth and um, show how this myth qualifies as a myth. And she was struggling with the whole Powtoon thing. So I said, well,
Yeah.
the learning objective was not to use Powtoon. It was to
Yeah.
define myth and explain how a story fits into myth. So you could do it this way instead. And she's like, oh, I can. I mean,
Now
yeah, the
look at
learning is
that.
there.
You just created such hope
Yeah.
in her. Like, oh, I'm okay as a person. I mean, she's beginning to accept herself as opposed to worried like I don't belong. You taught her, gave her tools where she can succeed and thrive, and you weren't caught up on it has to be uniformly this format this way. You're such an advocate in that moment, and I think some teachers feel like no, 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 I have to get them to do the same way because I'm preparing for the world. You really aren't. When you're really hiding behind that, you are compliant more than you have learned the material.
Well, maybe they're preparing them to work at McDonald's because
Or
McDonald's
some
wants
kind of
that uniform
automaton
same way to
thing.
do.
Yeah.
But most careers in the world want you to think outside the box to find different ways to do things more amazingly.
You know, that's what one of my professors at Virginia Tech said, Dr. Josiah Tolo. And he came from an African country as the clicking sound. So his name is pronounced a little bit different than that, but it was
Mhm.
Tlou. And he said one time, and as an undergraduate, and I remember it to this day, he said, you were hired for companies, organizations, schools, institutions, things like that, based on how you're similar, but you only advance by how you're different.
Yeah.
And if we keep saying you've got to be just like all these others, you're going to take away the very thing that makes, well, one place that makes, North America, Canada, United States, let alone other countries, so valuable to the world. Creativity, innovation, problem
Mhm.
solving. We can still do that. It's part of our reputation. And if you're this automaton, no, I will never color outside the lines. I'm struck by every positive development in civilization, every one of them, in law, technology, teaching, poetry, dance. It doesn't matter what it is. In culinary arts, in coding, was done by somebody who parted ways with the conventional practices of the time. And so we don't want to take away those teachable moments or going down blind alleys and still being accepted. So
Right.
the idea that failure is like a positive advancement, not this thing to avoid, all of that growth mindset stuff still comes to bear.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, with differentiation, it makes it difficult because a lot of teachers worry, okay, how do I equitably report this, and how do I equitably assess and basically report on a report card or assess this work? Um, how can teachers implement more equitable assessment and reporting practices when we differentiate?
Well, remember what equity really is. It's kind of a two-part dynamic every time you try to do something equitable. One is you're creating access to all the things other people have as well. So access to school, a healthy building, proper health care, access to the resources of the school or the resources other families might have. At the same time, we're providing access, we're removing barriers. We're remedying injustices that need to be remedied. We're changing systemic things, individual policies and behaviors, all of that. So we have to do both those things simultaneously as we do that. When it comes to differentiation, assessment, and grading and so on, one is the access to the school and resources. Two is access to a very large repertoire, dexterous, dedicated teacher and all the different avenues they might take and different resources they bring to bear. And then access to assessments that allow me to truly represent what I know accurately. If I have a learning disability, or if I am an English language learner, or some other thing, and the assessment you're using does not allow me to accurately represent what I know, the teacher doesn't have like an invitation. The teacher has this obligation to change the assessment so that an accurate report can be rendered. So we're going to go back to the original umbrella overall purpose of grading in particular is communication. So if we find another avenue of communication of student proficiency, that's great. If we've got something where there's so much emotional baggage and compliance and control with the symbols we're using, let's find another avenue to really report where students are, and even better, to put those tools in students' hands. So they always know where they are in relation to a goal. And maybe some of those goals are self-set, not just society telling you. One of my mantras every year is, let me get out of your way and not limit you to my sorry imagination as I'm doing this. And I don't want to limit the next generation to what the current generation in power thinks is excellent, because you guys might, I mean, the goal is that you will surpass us, not get equal to us. That's a sign that we're stagnating. So the goal is, hey, let this be a launching pad for you to journey out and do those things. When I'm equity minded, that means I have to have so many tools. I can do that removing of barriers, remedying injustice, but also opening things up. So I have to think creatively. And there are a lot of teachers who are like, you know, I've been teaching for a long time, and creativity can atrophy in a teacher if you teach the same thing without paying attention to that part of your teacher's soul. So I've got a student who doesn't have access to these resources, maybe has responsibilities when he or she goes home, even though they're only in 5th grade, but they have to take care of their siblings because of a one-parent household or whatever myriad of other things that are going on, that they just don't have access, right? They can't stay after school. They can't come early. What could I do to think outside the box to make sure that they still have access to those things rather than saying, oh, well? And we can brainstorm a lot of those, and I'd be glad to do that. In fact, I have slides on how do you, like when we did remote instruction, how do you bring the classroom to the student who can't get to school, and school's shut down, and there are all kinds of different competing real, dysfunctions, I guess, happening, and challenges in students' lives. And we still have to educate them and not miss this year of opportunity. We can brainstorm that. But if you're initially looking at something and going, he doesn't even do his homework, how can I possibly teach him? I'm like, oh my gosh, you put all your eggs in the one basket. There are 999 other ways to teach that student. Homework is one tiny little effective practice. Oh, it is? Yeah. So let's go back and figure out how the mind best learns and do those things. Because our single greatest tool as a teacher, educator of any subject is expertise in the human mind, not, well, we have the laptops and the Chromebooks. No, it's you understanding the pedagogy of how the mind, or the cognitive science of how the mind best learns. And I think if you're equity minded, you would seek out those resources so they're already at your fingertips mentally and skillfully there in the classroom. And then you would begin to not rely on the trappings of the classroom or persona as the way to engage kids solely. And certainly there's value to some of that, but you would really think about 8-year-olds in general. How do they really engage? And what do we know about the brain? 18-year-olds, how do they engage? Teaching seniors is very different than teaching freshmen. They're different animals. Mm-hmm. So we can say, what do I do for them that's different than what I do for the 18? And sometimes when I ask teachers, prove to me you're developmentally appropriate for that level, which includes a lot of the equity mindedness, they're kind of like, what do you mean? And that makes my heart, kind of race in worry and anxiousness that they couldn't tell me what's developmentally appropriate for a 15-year-old as opposed to a 10-year-old or something else. So I would hope that we would get up to speed on that. And I would hope that there'd be a whole course at schools of teacher ed on, hey, let's deal with the equity issues, but also how to build tenacity, perseverance, motivation in the next generation of kind of insecure humans as they're moving forward. Does that help at all, or you want to expand?
No, that absolutely helps. I do think that we do need to, as teachers, when I was in teacher prep programs, equity wasn't even a conversation.
Yeah.
And, it was on understanding the development of childhood and understanding pedagogical practices. We didn't even learn how to do a grade book, by the way.
Well, let me just throw this out here to mess everybody up. Equity comes under CRT in many states and school districts, and it's being outlawed in a lot of places. And it's become this huge blow up thing. And so you are now a radical, or the idea that the word equity becomes a threat to those currently in power is so gobsmacking irrational about what equity really is. And they would want equity for their own children, if the situations were reversed. And it's a ceaseless advocacy to, hey, I teach the way you learn and making sure that you're successful. That's it. But when you say equity and that we want to train teachers on equity measures, it's just the mindset that I do whatever it takes for you to flourish, as opposed to one way, my way or the highway, and that's it. Thinking that is fair for all, when no, it's equal for all, but it's completely unfair. And a lot of these people who are poo-pooing that are the first ones to fight for justice and, fairness. So I think there's a lot of distortion because people are just kind of getting staunch on their side of it. And when you talk about it, like I worked with school boards who, after we've met, said, I was elected to this position because I was anti-equity measures, anti this stuff. If I had known what equity was when I was running for office, I never would have taken that stance. And I really regret taking the stance.
Yeah.
So it's becoming informed, it's really caring, but not becoming so divisive. Still entering civil discourse. That's great that we can do that, but we're not seeing a lot of good models on it. And I am frightened for our country, many regions of the country, and students are actually becoming sick, and some are committing suicide as a result of inequitable assessment grading measures being employed. So now it is way more urgent that we do the compassionate thing, not the politically expedient thing. And that can be tough, I know.
Yeah. And equity works for everyone.
It does.
It doesn't matter. Equity is not just about race. It's about race. It's about gender. It's about
classism,
ability,
sexism.
Class. Yeah, exactly. It's about all these things. And as the father of two boys who have autism, equity impacts my kids, and both of them are very unique. It impacts them completely differently than it impacts others. So equity is something that, as educators, if it's our goal to educate and help every child to learn, then we have to learn how to help every child at their level.
As soon as we can make equity the biosphere instead of the oasis it currently is, the better we will be. But right now, it's so rare to see something truly equitable, given all the political toxicity. It's very hard to stomach that. And I thought we were progressing, but maybe not so much at this point. But I have hope, because there are some pockets where people are doing the right thing. It's just the minority of places. It should be the majority.
I agree. Now, you added chapters to Fair Isn't Always Equal, centered on grading and the problem with grades and how we can grade more equitably, since we're on this topic. What are some ways that educators can better communicate learning with students and share this learning with parents and other stakeholders, i.e. report cards?
I am so advocating for descriptive feedback, as you heard in our earlier comments. That's one. We overtly teach descriptive feedback techniques, not only to students, but to their parents as well. There's a lot of parents wondering, how do I help my child without cheating and over-assisting, if you get my drift, that sort of thing. But they really want those tools to do right. I think that's great. It really empowers the kids, which is what they want. They want their child to do very well post-high school, and they need these descriptive self-monitoring techniques. Two, I think we should get hot and heavy into student-led parent-teacher conferences, or just student-led conferences, where the students have to analyze the evidence and then demonstrate or prove how the evidence represents the evaluative criteria of the standard, the learner outcome, the competency, whatever it is. Three, I think we need to have digital or hard copy portfolios, collected works over time, and not be beholden to a regular school year. So, for example, a science portfolio, again, digitally maintained. You can take pictures of three-dimensional things and put them in there, or hard copy, but it's a portfolio of, here's this that I have created, and it represents these things, and here's how it represents these things. So there's a letter of analysis, reflection in there on the evidence and the standards, the growth since the last thing they did, with each item entered. And that follows you for the 4 years of high school, or the 2 or 3 years of middle school, or maybe it's the 3 years of grades 3, 4, 5, and the 3 years of first, second, and third. Your computer portfolio, your science portfolio, your PE portfolio, your math, your social studies portfolio, because we know it sometimes takes subsequent years to learn something. It's not finite. Many people are probably familiar with Bob Marzano's research from, I guess, a couple of decades ago now on, it's even worse today because we have more curriculum. But the idea that it would take to grade 22 to teach everything we claim to be teaching by grade 12. So we simply don't have the time to teach everything we tell the public we teach. And that's something that we have to recognize. And the public needs to recognize that. It's everything the kitchen sink. When I travel around the world, I see other countries and I look at the number of math standards, the number of science standards, and ours is geometrically more standards, yet they are, in international comparison studies, doing much better. So less is more. Let's do a deeper dive than a superficial mile wide, inch deep, and really claim, what we're doing here. We can be equitable as we move forward. And then the idea that students own their learning. So is that through descriptive feedback? And is that through student-led conferences and portfolios? But the more I can turn over the monitoring of what you're doing. For example, if a student says, is this going to be on the test? Then you haven't done your job, because you want to communicate from the get-go, because that tells the student what to elevate as salient, to prime the brain for what to seek and really focus, spend your energy, a scarce resource, on this very much. But also, if a student says, how am I doing in here? Another litmus test of, oh no, I need to do better. And then try having the students write down the grade they're going to get before they actually take the test, or turn in the project, or do the demonstration, turn in the code, the art piece, whatever it is. And they write it down, fold it up. You don't see what it is. It's in an envelope. You do the grading, whatever it is, and open up the envelope. 80% or more better have nailed it, and the other 20% better come darn close. That's a sign that you're living up to the promise that the summative grade, the summative final judgment assessment, is anticlimactic. They already knew what it was. They don't even need to have that final declaration or that product of evidence, because they already know what direction they're going. That's you owning your learning and know exactly where it comes. I think those would be really good avenues to follow. And then if you see yourself, as I mentioned before, as a coach. So in other words, I don't start, as Jim Knight would say, I don't telegraph an attribute. I don't send a judgment. That was creative. That was disorganized. That was a sorry hot mess. That was beautiful. That's being judgy. What I do as a coach is I try to get you to arrive at the awareness, not me tell you what that awareness should be. So I say, how does that match? What would you like to do next? What was the impact? It comes across like this. Is that what you wanted? I'm coaching you to make the discovery, not telling you in a declarative manner what to do. That would go a long way to help with some of the equity measures. And then, of course, your wide body of skill sets. So it's not just one way to assess, but I have 12 ways to assess. I'm chasing the evidence. I have a lot of ways to do that. And I've got 12 different ways to teach the thing as well. Hope that helps.
Yeah. No, that was excellent. One of the things that I would love to see in my school, if with that reporting measure, is having a showcase night at the end of the year.
Yeah.
where parents, community members, not just parents, but community members are, and we give kids 2 or 3 weeks or whatever it is at the end of the year to focus on that project that they want to hone down, whatever.
Yeah.
And they're showcasing this to the world. And then we invite these people in, and hopefully we have local businesses coming in looking for kids that can work for them. And then the parents come in and they can see this is what we've worked on throughout the year. And what I think something like that, having a showcase night at the end of the year, rather than doing parent conferences. I mean, it's so much more powerful than having a parent conference, is showing them what they're doing and having them do these showcases. It's going to challenge teachers to think creatively, because when they see teacher over here having students debate in their classes and teacher over here performing, doing a performance, and this teacher over here is doing business campaigns or whatever, we're going to have to think, what am I doing in my class if all we're showing is just a multiple choice test?
Oh, right. And you're talking about like Dennis Littke stuff, graduation by exhibition
Yeah.
out of New England, and that's wonderful. But you also raise a really other powerful point. Where do students get their validation for the learning and the hard work
Yeah.
they did in the class? It shouldn't be the majority of the time the teacher or mom and dad.
No.
It should be other classmates found what I did, what I learned and contributed valuable in their own efforts. That's one. I used this thing in this class in another class. So the integrated interdisciplinary stuff, there was value in another class to this hard thing I learned here. Wow. I used this that I learned in this class and this hard work to pursue something after school hours that gives me value. I had professionals in the field, because what I did was sort of close to what happens in the working world, who came in and gave feedback. In other words, there was an audience other than the teacher. I create a pop-up book for a standard and liquid and dry measure. And I share that with a grade level below me. So there's an audience, there's a student who's going to learn from the device I created, that we get math problems successfully resolved, poetry, students' writings, performances on the screens at local movie theaters. And that shows in a cycle before the actual previews start, or there's advertisements for popcorn and Coke or whatever. That we get science, literary magazines, math, literary magazines, PE literary magazines in the local Jiffy Lube or break fixing place, whatever it might be in your community, hospital waiting rooms and dentist offices, that it gets out in the community. Because I think it's sad, but we don't do a good enough job explaining what we do and having the public really see what students are capable of doing. And I think if we look for other places besides us, we can still validate. But the idea is that I want the student to find validation from a lot of other sources, not just, well, I'm only worth whatever grade the teacher gave me. Right. No, you were infinitely more than your grade. A grade is a summative judgment as of one calendar date, and it's temporary at best. It's incredibly arbitrary, and you need to know that you extend way beyond that. You transcend the grade.
Yeah. And I think kids want to learn something that is going to contribute to the greater world.
Yes.
I mean,
that they matter.
Yes, because when I sit and watch like the art program at our school, doing showcase nights where they invite the community in, and they even do things where they make bowls and sell them for charity. The awesome. Drama program is doing their performances, every semester. These are kids that are, and then you have your sports programs who are bringing people in to watch them, the bands and all that. They're doing so much to engage with the community and contribute. Here's what I have. Here's how my learning is going to make our community a better place. And I would love to see more of that in our classrooms. How can we do that? Well, so Rick, to close this all up, what are some resources that you would recommend for those interested in learning more about both differentiated instruction and providing more equitable assessment practices with our students?
Well, we have to go to the guy himself from Crescendo Group, Joe Feldman, Grading for Equity, if you want to get into some of that material. I think Star Saxton and Mark Barnes and their work about, with communities of teachers going gradeless, they have a lot of books on feedback ideas. Susan Brookhart is one of the biggest names in really good ideas on feedback, especially when you assess and give feedback on higher order thinking skills. Really good stuff. I think Bill Ferreter is really good. He does a lot of work with PLCs, but the yellow book, the big book of tools, has a lot of good ideas in there on how to do evidence. But I also think that, Larry Ainsworth, AIN, not AIM, but Larry Ainsworth, he does a lot of unwrapping standards and and looking at, what are the subsets, common formative assessment 2.0, really good stuff. And the idea that you get up to speed on what is truly evidentiary, how you figure that out, and then how does my lesson, instructional design, and my assessments reflect that, is going to be the go-to resource for that sort of thing. Now, there are a lot of us who talk about grading and say, look, if you have to grade, here's the ethical, accurate, equitable thing to do right now until such time as we have, evolve, or maybe we have other ways to do this. I am really taken by data clustering and graphic storytelling. And I think that in the next, 20 to 30 years, a lot of report cards aren't going to be symbolic. They're going to be graphic representations. So line graphs, landscape, mosaic, even movement associated to show progress over time. And I talk about this in some of my presentations. And I think that us getting into the graphic or representation of data and knowledge is going to be far more helpful than a symbolic judgment ever was. And so there are whole courses taught in high schools and middle schools now on the idea of information graphics and the media literacy, but also really, my daughter graduated in GIS, Geographical Information Systems, and remote sensing. And the idea of portraying knowledge in a graphical image way. Bob Marzano talked about this in Classroom Assessment and Grading that Works way back, 15 years ago. Maybe it was only 12 years ago. I don't know, but a long time ago. And it's since coming up a lot. And so the more we can migrate towards what the generation currently in school right now, and maybe into their 20s, the people into their 20s, early 30s, find very comfortable. Emojis and emoticons can speak whole paragraphs. But people of my generation, it takes us back a little bit. We're like, no, but what's the percentage? No. Look at the graphics, because patterns are revealed that otherwise were hidden. And you see, this correlates with that. That might have been an influencing factor. And you see that so much more readily with graphic imagery than you do with just symbolic judgment. And so I'm hoping that we could move towards that at least a little bit as one of the other sources to seek out. I have a slide just literally on the search words you can look up to get really good ideas. And I can, send that to anybody who wants to email me. But for right here, right now, I would start doing that. And then I would, the biggest one, I'd invite kids to come in on that collaborative process. Seriously, here are about 20 apps that are really good for feedback. I like these 5. Which of these 5 would be most helpful to you? And let them have a say, or literally turn over to high school, middle school, even elementary kids and say, here's my goal. Here are my principles when it comes to assessment and feedback and reporting, learning. Could you design an app for me that does that? Or at least we can work together on an app. And I think that would be a wonderful resource. So that's my initial suggestion.
Well, those are great ideas, Rick. And thank you for taking your time with us today. You are amazing. And I just absolutely enjoyed listening to you and the wealth of knowledge that you have.
It was my honor. It was such a joy to be with you too. Thank you for these broadcasts. They're helping all of us in the profession.
Well, I want to thank our audience for joining us for this episode of TG2Chat Live. I want to encourage you to support our work as we continue to help educators around the world grow beyond grades. I want to encourage you to become a Patreon member. At this time, I would like to thank our latest supporters, Lisa Wennerth and Jeff Brisson, and our Patreon partner, Brian Arnott, for the generous support, which is helping us provide content like this and so much more that we do. And I also want to thank again our sponsor, Spaces. Spaces, again, is a user-friendly digital portfolio tool, document students' growth in and out of the classroom. If you go gradeless, you're going to need a portfolio platform, and Spaces is a great way to facilitate that. So, Rick, what's up for you next, and how can people connect with you and your work?
Well, there's always at Rick Wormley 2. The first at Rick Wormley was hacked on Twitter, and we can't get that back. So as I was sharing with Aaron before the program, I'm so creative, I added a 2. So that's it. So at Rick Wormley 2, and then rickwormley.com. So www.rickwormley.com. And then here's the email. It's long. So it's from Office 365. So it's rick@rickwormley.onmicrosoft.com. So all those are great. And I'm continuing to do a heck of a lot of work on really helping the public understand a lot more about CRT, critical race theory and equity, and that side of it, instructional design, just how to have those conversations. But I'm hot and heavy into differentiation and evidence and grading and assessing in a way that is at least effective and compassionate with everybody else. And then I'm really intensely into cognitive linguistics and summarization. So that's metaphors, analogies, and using them in science and math and music and coding and everything. They're kind of a missed opportunity, and people don't think about them strategically. And so I've written about that, but also I've written about summarization techniques. So that's where I'm pushing forward. And the biggest thrill of all is becoming a grandfather for the first time during COVID, a wonderful source of joy in the midst of a challenging time.
Congratulations on that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Okay. All right. So we're going to conclude. I want to remind our audience one more time that we are giving away some free merchandise from our web store. So if you are watching this live, type in that URL. I'll do a drawing in the next couple of days, and I'll reach out to you and let you know if you won some stuff. Okay. All right, Rick, thank you again so much. And thank everybody for taking the time to watch us.
Thanks, Aaron.